So now as the storm quieted down a little bit down there in Dallas, we're going to better assess this situation, as there's more to this story on why Luka Doncic was traded. And in this segment, we're going to get a rare audio of Tim McMahon explaining Luka Doncic's whole saga in Dallas. And it's going to put things into proper perspective on why this whole ordeal took place. And before we get to that, there's quite a few inconsistencies that has come from Mark Cuban as well as Patrick Dumont, the new owner of the Mavericks, ever since this trade went down. Now, for those of you that are watching the video version of this, as you can see in the 24-25 season, Dallas was just at the luxury tax line. But the only thing that was apparent, just looking at the forest through the trees, was the upcoming payments that was going to be owed to Luka Doncic, extending his contract to a max deal, as well as Kyrie Irving had an upcoming extension as he had a player option. And with those lingering contracts pending, that was definitely going to affect the Dallas Mavericks, as they would be in that second apron, which would limit them on what kinds of trades they could make, what kind of free agents they could pick up. It would sort of put them in the same situation the Phoenix Suns were in with Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker. So knowing this, it was already a struggle for the Mavericks just to get this team that went to the NBA championship in 2024 together. Remember, they had to make major pivots in order to get PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford. And with the way salaries are just so high nowadays, if teams do not know what they're doing and they have a high-paid star like Luka Doncic on their team, they could end up being in salary cap hell for the next 4 to 5 years. And this is where it brings me to Mark Cuban and the inconsistencies with the sale of the Dallas Mavericks, particularly coming from him. The number that was floating around was $3.5 billion, but also right away in a PR move, it was made to be known that he would have control of the team, which fast forward turned out not to be true. See, the reason why they threw that out there, that he was still going to be in control of the team, is that the $3.5 billion that the team was allegedly sold for was considered too low due to the fact that the Phoenix Suns a couple years earlier had sold for $4 billion. That's why I say there's a lot of nuances to this story, because within the final days of Mark Cuban's reigns of just being the majority owner of the Dallas Mavericks, they lost their local TV deal. Almost half the NBA teams in the league kind of got involved with that Diamond Sports filing for bankruptcy. They kind of got caught in that wind, so teams had to rush and find ways of putting the games on for their fans to catch it. The Phoenix Suns, the Houston Rockets, the Utah Jazz, some of these teams, their games are free today just over the airwaves, or they collaborated with other local baseball teams and hockey teams to kind of formulate a package. But make no mistake about it, they are taking a pay cut when it comes to that television revenue. So right now, we know Mark Cuban has some upcoming extensions that's going to put him into the luxury tax with Luka and Kyrie. And at the same time, they lost their local TV revenue. But here's Mark Cuban 9 years earlier explaining how owning an NBA team isn't the luxury that it really seems to be. You guys check it out.
The LA Clippers franchise is going to sell far north, in my opinion.
You think so? Of $1 billion?
Oh, yeah, not
Really?
even close. Yeah,
Really?
not even close. Now, the bigger issue there is we talk about people wanting to own sports franchises. There's a finite number. But the pricing now, people always ask me, would you buy a football team? I can't afford a football team.
Really?
Right? But, I walk through the streets of New York, people pull over their cars, buy the Mets, buy the Mets, buy the Mets. A, I don't want to be in MLB anymore, but B, I don't think I could afford them. The point being, acquiring a franchise has gone from, kind of rich guys, regardless of their demographic,
Right.
or women, right? Because there's women owners as well, being able to write a check for a team, to it being a consortium.
A business deal, a big business deal with lots of stakeholders.
Yeah, you have lots of stakeholders, right? And there's a lead partner and there's a lot of investors. That changes the tenor of the entire sport, right? Of all sports, right? It's no longer, I used to be the young kid on the block causing problems, right? Now I'm one of the old school dudes, right? Because we've had such a turnover, and a lot of the professional sports have had a big turnover, and the people coming in to buy the teams are rarely individual owners anymore.
Right.
Now they're consortiums, as you said.
So things are really going to change for the Clippers.
Things have, again, I can't talk to the Clippers, what I'm saying in sports in general, right? We've already turned the corner now that buying a professional sports team in any of the 3, maybe 4, including the NHL sports leagues, even Major League Soccer we're talking about, the price of a franchise has gone from, I remember people talked to me years ago, $10 million, right, to $100+ million. It's no longer someone just writing a check, hey, this is my team, right, come into my locker room. It's a real business. It's not, what's the right word? It's not a trophy asset like it used to be. It has to make money. And that has changed dramatically. And it's almost the law of unintended consequences that these circumstances with the Clippers could be what changes it even more dramatically.
Now, Mark Cuban was speaking like this way before the new CBA took effect, in which today's current rules really punishes teams for spending a lot of money. So it's even more expensive than it used to be to maintain a championship team from year in and year out. But again, it's the sale of the Mavericks that should have been the first hint to Dallas Mavericks fans that something could really go stray, because that $3.5 billion number that Cuban got was already considered low among the national NBA media members. And that 3.5 number also includes debt. So the number at the end of the day, even after taxes or whatever is taken out, really could be 1.2 to 1.5 billion. But again, Cuban not only threw it out there that he sold the team, but he actually had some control of what was going on in the front office, which we found out even after the Luka trade that was not true. And with Cuban loving the spotlight so much, as we all know he does, he kept on talking and talking until he finally gave up his true feelings.
Was your son upset about the trade?
Yeah, I mean...
Were you?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And I've said this before, if the Mavs are going to trade Luka, that's one thing. Just get a better deal. No disrespect to Anthony Davis, but, get 3. If I still firmly believe if we had gotten 4 unprotected number 1s and Anthony Davis and Max Christie, this would be a different conversation.
Would you ever have traded Luka Doncic?
I'm not going to go there. It doesn't even matter. I went through this before when Steve Nash left and then won 2 MVPs.
Yeah.
Right. The good news is that we went to the finals and won a championship. So I've been through something, but there wasn't social media back then, so it wasn't quite the same. But yeah, I mean, you're going to make mistakes, and I think the biggest challenge that the Mavs have right now is there's nobody who's really outgoing to communicate. And it's not so much what you do, it's how you communicate why you do what you do.
Mark Cuban loving the spotlight, but also showing that initial report of him having control of the team ended up not being true, because a few months later, Luka got shipped out. And speaking of the inconsistencies, let's hear from Patrick Dumont himself as he calls this Luka trade a long-term move.
So tough decisions are never easy. And part of leadership is looking at risk and looking at all the factors of a decision and being willing to act at that time and look to the long term and not only think about the short term or how it may be received immediately, but to think about the long-term benefits and what it may allow you to achieve if given all the right considerations. And I think for us, going into the trade deadline last year, we were not competitive. If you recall, we were not a playoff-bound team. And we were able to do some things to reconstruct the roster and enable the team to become very competitive. And after the trade deadline last year, we actually had the best record in basketball, which was a big accomplishment. And we got to the championship games, and we didn't win. And so we had to decide, how do we get better? What can we do to improve our team? And so we looked at our trajectory during the season and realized that we did not get better. But the teams that we competed against, some of which we beat, did get better. And ultimately, when you look at the Eastern Conference, after we were to get through the Western Conference, if we're so fortunate, you would have to beat some very formidable teams, including one that we lost to, which actually got better. So this was a decision about the future. If you look at our roster today and who we have, we feel like we position ourselves to be incredibly competitive against the best teams in the NBA. And if you're a fan of basketball, I'll just throw that out there, you have Kyrie Irving, Klay Thompson, PJ Washington, Anthony Davis, and either Daniel Gafford or Derek Lively as your starting 5. That's going to put fear into a lot of teams in the league. if we can get going.
Boy, that's a tough sell right there. And also him calling the moves a long-term move after Nico Harrison said, hey, they're trying to win now. So again, a lot of inconsistencies of what's really being said. And Dumont, you really can't sell that starting lineup to a fan base when they had the best player 25 and younger in the whole NBA. But hold on right there. There's some more inconsistencies. Knowing that there's a new CBA and it punishes teams who spend a lot of money, check out what Patrick Dumont had to say about having max players outside of Luka on the Mavericks.
The other thing that people say is, salary cap. I have to tell you something. It was not about the contract. The way the NBA works, there's a salary cap, and it's just a percentage of the cap. So if I could sign 3 max players, I'd do it. It's just a percentage of risk allocation within the team's overall cost structure. So I don't know if anyone from the team hears me, but if you can find us 3 max players, let's go.
Tomorrow.
Let's go.
It's kind of crazy in today's landscape. There's a lot of media covering the NBA, but notice right there, there's no pushback, which there should have been right away. So sometimes owners and players get to skate around certain questions and avoid certain accountabilities. So now we're finally going to get to Tim McMahon and this exclusive audio. And keep in mind, when Luka got traded, he was in the middle of writing his book and he had to stop and kind of take everything in what was going on behind the scenes. So we're kind of getting a sneak peek on what was going on behind the curtain, as well as this overall saga playing out. You guys check it out, and every once in a while, I'll check in.
So I didn't rewrite anything. I just added another chapter. And so the kind of the premise of the whole book is the pressure on an NBA franchise when you draft a prodigy through the prism of Luka and the Mavericks. And look, immediately before Luka got there, throughout his tenure, there were all kinds of twists and turns, all kinds of drama and dysfunction. Some of that which he was directly involved in, not necessarily always directly to blame. Often, I would say, often not. But, we're talking about a franchise that has had the departure of the most successful coach in NBA history, a complete turnover in the front office, at the ownership level, whiffed on the Porzingis trade that kind of blew up in their face, bungled the Jalen Brunson situation, letting the co-star on a Western Conference Finals team leave for nothing, the Kyrie trade into a tank that year. There's just been all kinds of craziness and chaos throughout the career of this generational talent.
Also, I want to add on to this. We can't forget his performance in the NBA Finals. I gotta admit, Luka's the first superstar. You see him have all the talent, everything in the world, all the gifts. But at the end of the day, what killed him in the finals was pretty much lack of conditioning, lack of details on the defensive end. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Derek White, they were just getting penetration anywhere all day long. And it took the Mavericks in Game 4 to break an NBA Finals record as far as shooting percentages as a team in order to get a victory. So Luka entering into his final season wasn't exactly coming off a positive stretch. To see all that work put in, but his lack of conditioning and just details on defense really is what cost the Mavericks that finals.
He's putting together 5 straight first-team All-NBA appearances by the age of 25, and somehow, some way, the Mavericks managed to scramble and successfully build a contender around him to eliminate the possibility that, and I'll say this, Luka was never going to look for reasons to leave, but it appeared for a while that those reasons might be smacking him in the face. And that was definitely a massive fear in this organization. They built a contender around him. They salvaged this thing a year after the tank. They're going to the NBA Finals. And months later, 6 years after kissing this guy's butt, they shank him in the back and trade him when he has no knowledge and he's fully expecting to sign a Supermax that summer. We've never seen anything like it. I didn't have to rewrite anything. I just had to tack on the crazy plot twist chapter at the end that explains everything that happened this season in Dallas leading up to the trade deadline.
So right there, Tim just gave a nice little summary of Luka's whole experience in Dallas. And we can't forget, just them getting to the finals was already a roller coaster ride with losing Jalen Brunson and also shipping a lot of guys away. Remember, they're trying to get Kyle Kuzma in Washington to end up getting Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington. But right here, Tim McMenamin also brings up the reality of the expenses of owning an NBA contending team today. The finances in this Luka story is definitely a major factor into how this thing overall played out.
And I've asked Cuban recently, I said, do you regret selling? And he said, sometimes. Then I checked my bank account. So I think we get to the real reason that he sold. I mean, the man cashed out at almost 10 times what he paid, just a huge, massive profit. And the simple fact, and Cuban has admitted this, he calls himself a middle-class billionaire, which I think you should accompany that line with some violin music. But his point is a middle-class billionaire can't fund an NBA contender as expensive as they've gotten out.
And also, NBA owners can't afford to maintain contending teams when they previously have shown that they've struggled in order to put together that contending team. That's another thing that has gotten overlooked. Just look at the saga the Mavericks have been in. They lost Jalen Brunson. They had to go after Kyrie. And then they had to reconfigure the team by getting rid of certain guys and adding Daniel Gafford, adding PJ Washington. So it was already a roller coaster ride. Because remember, they tanked the season before they got Derek Lively. So they kind of struggled to put pieces together around Luka. And teams that don't have the right front offices to put together teams with an already big-time superstar being on the roster, that is really going to cost you big time in today's NBA, especially with the way the CBA is constructed.
Mavericks, from the time they broke up that 2011 championship team, when Cuban was the guy who read the CBA and challenged everybody who questioned the moves whether you had, they hadn't paid luxury tax up until this year. And, Cuban, who very proudly for a long time would spend whatever, was counting pennies. And, that's part of what went down with the whole Jalen Brunson negotiations. The luxury tax was looming there. And so I really think this was a chance for Cuban to cash out. And, I think he hoped that he would keep basketball operations, even though that was never realistic. But it was a chance to cash out, and it was an acknowledgement that he didn't have the funds to financially support an NBA contender, especially as Luka was about to be on a Supermax deal. The one-man coaching search, Rick Carlisle resigned because he was going to be on the hot seat. It was a matter of time before Rick got fired. And Rick got fired because, or was en route to getting fired. Rick left because he could control, he could get a job at that point. He thought it was going to be Milwaukee. He had Indiana as kind of the bird in hand. But again, that was because the relationship with Luka had deteriorated. And Cuban assembled this advisory committee, Dirk Nowitzki, Casey Smith, the longtime athletic trainer, who was running their health and performance stuff, who was shockingly fired before last season, which played an underrated role in all this. Don Kalkstein, longtime Mavs sports psychologist. Keith Grant, who was a Mavs lifer until he recently retired, literally worked his way from ball boy to assistant GM. And Michael Finley was the advisory committee. They huddled in Cuban's bunker suite after Rick's resignation and basically decided during that meeting, we're going to hire Jason Kidd. And then instead of hiring a general manager, because remember, Donnie Nelson got fired and Rick resigned within days. And those were unrelated. People thought at the time Rick was resigning out of protest of Donnie's dismissal. I assure you that that was not the case. Rick was just fine with Donnie's dismissal. But they decided, okay, Jason Kidd's going to be our head coach. Who would be a good GM for him to work with him? And that's what led them to Nico Harrison, at the time was running the North American basketball division at Nike. It had been involved in executive searches for other franchises. The Spurs being the one that sticks out there. But if Nico's not the GM, if Kidd's not the head coach, then I highly doubt that they end up trading Luka, despite the fact that with Luka as the centerpiece of the franchise, they went to the Western Conference Finals that year. A couple years later, they went to the NBA Finals. But what ended up happening is Nico and Jay Kidd ran out of patience with Luka Doncic, with the constant conditioning concerns, with some of the petulance and all.
Again, there goes Luka's performance in the NBA Finals. That was the boiling point, especially that game 3 when he fouled out. All the reckless and just lazy fouling because the lack of conditioning. That was the boiling point. So him coming into the next season not quite being as healthy, their patience started to wear thin.
Those sort of things, despite the fact that this guy's production at his age ranks up there with anybody who you want to bring up in NBA history. So like I reported that Casey was reassigned, and I didn't blow it up because I thought it'd be a piece of a bigger story that season. And then they went to the finals. You know, they had this midseason turnaround. They went to the finals, but it is a piece of the biggest story, arguably in franchise history. And that's this Luka trade, because Casey Smith was fired. You know, after last season, after the finals trip, Jeremy Holsopple, their longtime strength coach, Casey Spangler, you know, their longtime massage therapist, they're both fired. Now, and these aren't just people who were good at their job and that Luka liked. These are people who were massive parts of Luka making this cultural transition from a wide-eyed teenager from Europe into America, into the NBA. These, I'm not saying they were family to him, but they were definitely people that he liked and respected. And as Luka grumbled to people this year, they get rid of everybody that I like. That was a huge part of the relationship between Luka and Nico Harrison in particular, completely fraying. And I think the most polite way you can describe that relationship pre-trade was distant at this point. Dysfunctional would be probably another way. Disrespectful is certainly the way some people have described it to me. But yeah, the relationship fell apart, and it's hard for me to sit here and tell you that wasn't a massive part of what led to the most shocking personnel decision that we've ever seen.
You know, it's kind of crazy because with a new owner, sometimes they kind of have the same syndrome as the Chicago Bulls owner with Michael Jordan, where he sided with the GM over the player, thinking that they can just find another Michael Jordan. And still to this day, they have not quite found that replacement. I believe that GM's name was Jerry Krause. The Bulls owner sided with him over Michael Jordan at times, and especially Phil Jackson. But Patrick Dumont has shown that he has green eyes when it comes to understanding the symbiotic relationship Luka has with Dallas and the fan base. And the green light kind of went off in Patrick Dumont's head when he seen the backlash that the organization had received after trading Luka. But Tim McMahon speaks on the cost around giving a player the Supermax contract. It's not necessarily the contract itself that's expensive. It's maintaining a complete and competitive team around Luka is what really was the hurdle for the Mavs to jump over, especially with them not necessarily even being good at formulating a team around Luka to begin with.
And here's the thing. It wasn't the fear of Luka not signing the Supermax. It was the fear of being committed to Luka on a Supermax contract that played a role in the Mavericks making this trade. The Mavericks thought Luka would be a bad investment on a Supermax contract. That's an awfully risky take to have in terms of how it's going to age, but that's exactly what they felt. They weren't scared of him not signing it. They were scared of him signing it and then being committed to him.
And just taking a step back and just trying to understand exactly what Tim McMahon just said right there, because every single season with Luka being on that Supermax and just having to renew Kyrie, perhaps get a couple role players that are kind of at the mid-level. Every season, the Mavericks could be looking at $70 to $110 million in luxury tax. And the longer teams now stay in that luxury tax, you get penalized on your draft picks in the future. And you also now get limited on what kind of trades you can make. No more 2-for-1s. You can't make any trades where the numbers don't exactly match up to the T. The Mavericks would now become exactly what had happened to the Phoenix Suns, where you're fishing every season in the minimum player market because you just have too many guys on salary. Booker, Durant, and Beal just eating up so much of that cap that not only you're shelling out over $100 million every season in luxury tax, but you actually can't improve the team. And if you want to re-sign a player who happened to break out, let's say a role player like Grayson Allen, they ended up paying him double his salary because they have to shell out additional money for luxury tax. So Patrick Dumont and his family would try to justify why they just spent $3.5 billion on a team when every season the team is operating in a negative, where they're paying out a luxury tax and they're getting worse and worse and worse as the years go by, and their future first round draft picks are being automatically pushed to the back of the line. So make no mistake about it, this is going to be a conundrum for a number of teams when their young players hit their 7th to 10th NBA season. Any top performing player out of the lottery in that 7th and 10th year is eligible for 35% of the team's salary cap. You got SGA, Ja Morant, Paolo Banchero. A lot of small market teams are going to have to face this reality, while at the same time them losing that additional revenue from their local TV markets. The Phoenix Suns, even though when they had Kevin Durant and Booker and Beal, they were available over the antenna for free. Other teams had to collaborate with baseball teams and NHL teams in order to create an app or create an additional package for their fans to try to tune into their games. So it's like a lot of different storms combining all at once to kind of create this type of atmosphere. But hey, this is an environment that the owners and the players had voted for, and Luka, being a top homegrown talent of his team, is not going to be the only superstar that's going to be surprisingly traded under these new CBA rules. There's going to be other teams that's going to struggle to put a contender around their young star. And eventually, after the 7th or 10th season, when them contracts start coming up, those extra super maxes where it starts to look like 80 mil a year, 70 mil a year, even 90 to 100, because that's where it's going up to. These teams are going to begin to ship their stars away, not necessarily because they want to, it's because the costs are just way too high. And some of these franchises may not want to admit, but they don't have necessarily the front office personnel to put a contending team year in, year out around their superstars. See, it's not just picking up a couple of players or just plucking a couple of guys off of free agency. It's going to be a nice little sweet spot. It's going to be a nice little combination of just managing the numbers as far as the contract years and when they come off the books versus adding additional players into that whole mix. It's almost as if now teams actually have to be equally as good as managing the money and also acquiring new talent that actually fits. There's now a very thin line between competing for a championship and starting over. So this is the landscape going forward, and the NBA owners as well as the players agreed on this type of dynamic. Luka will not be the only superstar reaching his 7th to 10th season on the team that he got drafted on, surprisingly getting traded.